Welcome, everyone, to NASAA's web seminar on visualizing grant diversity. Our session will be getting underway in just a moment, but meanwhile, please take a second to complete your connection following the system prompts to synchronize your phone line and web identity. It's going to help us manage the audio lines during today's seminar. And now, with a special welcome, here's NASAA's President and CEO, Pam Breaux. Pam?
Thanks, Eric, and good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We are excited to share a new NASAA resource to help you address the critical issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts. A major challenge identified by public and private arts funders relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion is acquiring better data on the populations being served by arts funding. For example, the D5 Coalition, a group of foundations that came together to better understand diversity in the philanthropic world, identified demographic data collection as a key aspect of their work. From the public sector perspective, having this data is especially important. State arts agencies have a mandate to serve the entire population of their states. NASAA's work in addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion is multifaceted. Our board of directors has made thoughtful progress to address these issues. As you may know, we have crafted a policy statement to guide our work. We've also integrated a commitment to these efforts in our planning and in all our activities moving forward. We've offered multiple sessions and resources within our learning services portfolio, and our research team highlighted the diversity programs and policies of state arts agencies in a publication last year. You can find all of these resources under Best Practices in the research section of our website. What you're going to see today is a new tool that uses your data to describe populations reached by state arts agencies. Not only are we offering the tool, but we are pleased to offer our time to provide individual conversations with every state about your data. Our research team is your research team, and you'll learn more about how to set up your own consultation during this webinar. Our field's work in this area is critical. It's also long-term and incremental, and we hope this new tool serves as a positive contribution to our collective efforts and to your efforts individually. With that, I'll hand things back over to Eric for some tech tips.
All right, thank you, Pam. For today's session, we have a trio of NASAA researchers: Kelly Liu, Grant Data Associate, Patricia Mullaney-Loss, Research Associate, and Ryan Stubbs, Research Director. They're going to lead us through an overview of a new NASAA tool to help state arts agencies better understand how they serve diverse populations through visualizing their grant data. Afterwards, we'll hold a Q&A session to answer your questions. Now, to get the session rolling, here's Ryan. Ryan?
Thanks, Eric. So I'm excited to share an overview of our team's work in visualizing grant diversity with all of you today. This project partially stems from our long-term efforts of NASAA, state arts agencies, and the NEA to collect and utilize final descriptive report data. We're always looking at ways to improve our field's data, and an important part of this is effectively utilizing the data that we have. NASAA's work in communicating and visualizing state arts agency grants data contributes to a better understanding of the data you all collect. And this project utilizes visualization tools to specifically highlight populations served and state demographics. Our goal here is to make progress toward giving state arts agencies additional resources to communicate the value of public funds reaching many communities and to report how we are serving underserved populations. It has the potential to assist with planning and strategies to reach communities that you may not be reaching. And it can be used to benchmark progress from year to year based on what you know about your state's population. These efforts dovetail nicely with NASAA's work around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which Pam talked about earlier. What we'll show you today is a series of dashboards we've created showing how state funding reaches low-income communities, populations of color, various age groups, individuals with disabilities, as well as other distinct groups. I would say that this is one way of looking at a complex issue. And as with any research resource, it's important to keep in mind the limitations of the data and to use this tool in a way that makes sense for your own state and your own strategies. This isn't a definitive scorecard on how your state is doing with respect to serving diverse populations. It is a resource to improve knowledge and hopefully help to inform some transformative conversations down the line. So we now have the ability to provide demographic information from a couple of different angles. One is about the underlying demographic populations. That gives us an idea of the populations surrounding arts grantees and activities, but it doesn't necessarily say who is being served by specific grants and organizations. So the other angle is looking at beneficiary data as reported by your grantees in your FDR. The recent changes in NEA reporting requirements has helped us get a better idea of where grants and activities are taking place and who benefits. I want to reiterate that we're able to do this because of a few key changes to the FDR. And while some of those changes were a little painful, we're starting to see dividends. For fiscal year 2014, we started receiving grantee address data. Before this, we were only working with zip codes. Street address data has allowed us to more precisely locate the geographic location of grantees, which helps a great deal when matching grant locations with other geographic boundaries, such as counties and legislative districts. In fiscal year 2016, there were some major changes to NEA reporting requirements. This included changes to the data we receive on populations benefiting by race, age, and distinct groups. Now, grantees estimate if at least 25% of a particular group benefited from an award. And while not a precise measurement, we think this has resulted in easier reporting at the grantee level and better data. Another major change was the reporting of activity locations. We now receive not only the address of the grantee, but many more locations of where grantee activities take place. This has allowed us to more accurately portray the expansive reach of state arts agency awards. So the new FDR data is a big part of what we'll show today, but the other major data source comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. We are using Census Demographics from the American Community Survey. The ACS is an extremely useful and valid resource for demographic data in the years between the 10-year census. And don't worry, we're not going to talk about census survey methodology today, but I wanted to point out that this is the source for the demographic data we'll be presenting. Now on to the dashboards. I'm going to give a brief overview of what we'll see before handing things over to Kelly Liu. We'll go ahead and bring up Tableau Online, which is a software tool that our team has been using to do this work. This allows us to create interactive visualizations, and we'll be sharing our screen so you can see how they work. The first series of dashboards is based on the geographic location of the grant or activity and the underlying demographics. So the American Community Survey has an amazing amount of information, and it was a tough choice for us to concentrate on a handful of characteristics to use in these dashboards. And the demographic measures that we've chosen to replicate for every state are median household income, poverty, populations of color, and populations with disabilities. These measurements seem to resonate in our early versions of this work. Now, in every dashboard, each demographic characteristic is grouped into quartiles based on the range of data present in an individual state. So while we'll be showing Michigan in a second, the range of the population statistics will be different in every state, and every state's dashboard will be tailored to the unique populations and geographies of the state. However, the general format and types of analyses that we are showing you are replicated for each state. So each dashboard has a map that shows the spread of grants and activities through the state and the underlying county demographics. Along with this, we have a couple of straightforward charts that show the distribution of grants and activities by category and the distribution of grants and dollars relevant to the populations. So in this demonstration, you'll see examples of all the dashboards we have created for each state, but we're only using a couple of states as examples. Michigan, and Arizona. So many thanks to our colleagues in Michigan and Arizona for allowing us to do this demonstration. And with that, I'll hand things over to Kelly Liu for the first part of the demonstration.
Thank you, Ryan. On this income dashboard, using Michigan as an example, the blue dots on the map you see are grants, and the yellow dots are the grants associated activity locations, which are the venues the activities took place in. Hovering over a dot will tell you the grantee's name and the city the grant or activity took place in. Their distribution throughout the state is overlaid on a map of the state's median household income shaded by county. We've divided the counting range into 4 quartiles so you can see which counties are in the lower, under $45,000 quartile, the 2 middle, $45,000 to $50,000, and $50,000 to $55,000 quartiles, and the higher, over $55,000 quartile. The darker the shade, the higher the income. You can zoom into grant-dense areas of the map to get a better look at the distribution in the big cities. For example, let's zoom in around the Detroit area. Here you get a better idea of the grant and activities occurring in Detroit and its surrounding suburbs. The histogram on the top right of the dashboard shows how many grants and activity locations are in counties of each income quartile. You can see that most of Michigan's grants go to the counties with median household incomes below $45,000. While we can tell where a majority of grants are going by county income levels, it is also important to put these data in context relevant to population. The graph on the bottom right shows what percentage of the state's population live in counties at each income quartile and how many grants and activity locations and grant dollars go into them. In Michigan, a plurality of its residents live in counties with median household incomes below $50,000, consistent with the plurality of awards and dollars from the Michigan Council. On the next dashboard shows Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs grants overlaid on county poverty rates. The poverty rate is the percentage of individuals living below the poverty line. Similar to the income dashboard, this is another way of looking at the distribution of wealth in the state, except it helps draw focus to the poorest counties. Like many states, Michigan has areas with high poverty rates that exist in both urban and rural areas. You can see that the Michigan Council awarded more grants in counties with higher poverty rates. The chart in the lower right-hand part of the page shows that the Michigan Council makes its largest investments in counties with the highest poverty rates in the state. The next dashboard looks at census demographics showing county populations by race. In some of the dashboards that we'll be showing a little later, you'll see race demographics broken down in separate categories. But in this dashboard, we looked at populations by race to show populations identifying as white and no other race versus all other race categories. Essentially, we bifurcated the population into white and non-white categories. The map shows that counties with higher percentages of populations of color are concentrated in a few areas of the state. To give an idea of the stark contrast, populations of color in Wayne County is at 46.7%, while directly south in Monroe County, it is nearly 95% white. The bar graphs on the right also show most residents live in counties with fewer peoples of color. However, counties with higher percentages of peoples of color, over 25 and 30%, do get slightly more investment proportional to their percentage of the state's population. And on the last dashboard, showing Michigan County populations with disabilities, this data shows population with difficulties and abilities related to hearing, vision, cognitive function, ambulatory function, self-care, and independent living. This does not take age into consideration. Therefore, there will be a strong overlap between disabilities and older populations on this dashboard. The dashboard shows that in most Michigan counties, over 15% of residents are living with some level of disability of physical functions. While this doesn't say anything about the types of disabilities, it does help bring to light the large number of people living with disabilities. The charts to the right show that more of the Michigan Council investments go to those counties with higher percentages of disabled residents. And now, Patricia will present the dashboard showing populations benefiting from SAA grant making.
Thanks, Kelly. So while I put this up here, I'll be showing you a series of dashboards looking at the new populations benefited SDR fields with demographic county overlays from the American Community Survey. So this will be looking a little bit similar to what you just saw with Kelly. So pulling up the first chart, you'll see a map with dark circles showing the location of grantees that selected a particular race ethnicity group that made up 25% or more of their served population. We are looking at grant recipient locations on this map, not activity locations, since the populations benefited fields are reported for each grant as a whole. The counties are shaded based on the selected race ethnicity population. To the left of the map, we have a bar chart that shows the percent of total awards, the percent of total grant dollars, as well as the percent of the state's total population. So we can see how the beneficiary data matches up with the state's demographic composition as a whole. So as you can see, we have selected Asian down below here. So this will show us the grantees that served Asian populations along with the county demographics. Like the dashboards Kelly just showed you, you can scroll over each grant and each county to see more information, and you can also zoom in on, let's say, Phoenix. So, and we can see exactly where grantees serving Asian populations are located. And now going on to Black and African American populations, you can see that they're mostly clustered around Phoenix here, but proportionally 4.5% of total awards are serving African American populations, and that's comparable to the state's population. Hispanic and Latino beneficiary data, we can see that the distribution of grantees serving Latinx populations is spread over the entire state and matches the state's population. So you can look here at the distribution of awards, and then you can see that Hispanic and Latinos make up about 30% of the state's population, and about a third of grantees say that they're serving these populations. There are a few counties that have large Native American populations, and we can look at the corresponding grantees that serve these communities. So you can see that there's more Native Americans in this upper northeast quadrant of Arizona. And the one great thing about viewing demographic and beneficiary data together is that you can observe how the grantees in a particular area are serving local populations. And as a result, this helps assess how grantees are reporting this beneficiary data. In this case, we can see that the distribution of awardees reporting that they serve Native American populations generally corresponds to the underlying population within the counties. So you can see here we have been more grantees serving Native populations, yeah? And the state aggregates also show that grantees are serving Native American populations in proportion to the state's population. So Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian is a very small group in Arizona. White population makes up about 3/4 of the state, and a little over half of grant recipients say that at least 25% or more of their audiences and program participants were white. Another third of grantees reported no single race or ethnic group exceeded 25%. So while this is a substantial amount of grantees that report they do not serve a single group, we think that this is an improvement over past reporting requirements when even more grantees were in this category. And I would just say that this is certainly something for states to monitor, because we definitely do want grantees to report specific groups whenever possible. So on to the next tab. You'll see two bar graphs side by side, and they display the number of awards and the grant dollars in each category to kind of give you a sense of the composition of beneficiaries served by grantees in the whole. We also included the total number of awards and total grant dollars up top for reference on every dashboard that you'll see in this segment. And I just wanted to give a reminder about the beneficiary fields. Grantees can select more than one of these race ethnicity categories, so this is why the sum of all of these categories in the bar charts is not going to equal the total awards or grant dollars above. So now moving on to age. Right now we have children and youth 0 to 18 selected, and you can see their distribution throughout Arizona, as well as that about 39% of awardees serve children and youth in Arizona. Young adults, we can also see this distribution. And just to note that when you see a county that has a larger young adult population, it's probably due to a college town. And I believe there's a college town in Coconino County. Adults make up about 50% of the state's population, and you can see the grants serving adults in particular here. And then moving on to older adults. Older adults make up about 16% of the state's population, and about a quarter of grantees reported serving them. Then no single group exceeded 25%. That's about 40% of grants that selected this category. So again, having technical difficulties, there we go. So now we can see the charts that show you the proportion overall of the age groups benefited from grantees. And now in the last series of dashboards, we have beneficiary data for distinct groups. So first we have individuals with disabilities. And as Kelly mentioned earlier, the census data on disabilities will overlap with mature populations in the state. And that's why the percent of total state population figure right here might be a little bit higher than expected. But you can see that about 7.5% of grantees are serving individuals with disabilities, kind of all over the state. Individuals in institutions is the next category. And you can see that there's a bit of a cluster down here in Tucson for grantees serving individuals in institutions. Individuals below the poverty line. This is another way to look at what you saw on the previous series of dashboards Kelly demonstrated. You can see that grantees over the whole entire state are serving individuals below the poverty line at a slightly higher rate than the total state population. So the total state population for individuals below the poverty line is about 17%, and 22% of grantees are serving these communities. Individuals with limited English proficiency, again, the grantees serving these communities is pretty comparable to the state's population. Military veterans and active duty officers, the next category, and youth at risk. So you saw also with individuals and institutions that sometimes the American Community Survey does not have this demographic data available at the county level. And just to note that there are there's no direct definition in reporting requirements for these distinct groups, and it will vary how a grantee views the community it's serving. So here again we have the side-by-side charts, and we see that about 2/3 of grantees selected this no single group category. And this basically makes sense because these distinct groups do not generally take up more than 1/4 of the general population. So only grantees with programs specifically for these groups or where these groups are more prevalent, the grantees will select that accordingly. So that's the other series of dashboards that we have created for y'all, and I will pass it back over to Ryan.
Great. Thanks, Patricia, and thanks, Kelly, for those great demonstrations. There was just one other thing that I wanted to touch base on before opening this up to questions. So what you've seen here is an in-depth look at data in Michigan and Arizona. But imagine getting the same information for your state. Well, that dream is now a reality. We're now scheduling individual demonstrations with every state agency to share this resource. To schedule your demo, all you have to do is contact Kelly Lou, and she'll provide you with some dates and options to set up a screen share between your team and our research team. So you may be wondering who from your team should join in the demonstration, and that's really up to you. In general, I think EDs, deputies, and grant officers will be the most interested, but it would be ideal if individual agencies can coordinate who they would like to participate when confirming a demonstration date. And so that is all we have for the demonstrations and the presentations, but I wanted to now throw it back to Eric, who I think has a few questions for us.
Thanks, Ryan. I do indeed. We actually got quite a few questions today. I'm going to start with one that's actually come up a couple times. So understand that they can set up a demonstration to see the dashboards, but are they able to receive the dashboard, say, to use in an annual report or insert into a publication? And if so, if they can get those dashboards, in what format will they receive them?
Great. Right. So we have a few ways for states to receive the dashboards. First, we can send you these Tableau files, and if you don't have Tableau, there is a free version called Tableau Reader, and it can be easily downloaded and used to view the interactive files in the same way that we've shown you them today. Also, all of these dashboards have been formatted as a letter size, 8.5 by 11. So they can also be printed out as PDFs, and we can deliver them in that format if you would like. What we've shown you today actually is Tableau Online, and this is a cloud-based software that allows for things to be shared easily and securely online. However, there are some hard costs associated with setting up a Tableau Online account. And there's also a free version of Tableau called Tableau Public. And that allows for everyone to share things online easily, but also everything is publicly accessible. So it may not be the best way to initially share this information. So all this is to say that there's multiple options that we have to get this information in your hands. And you'll have time to think about what works best for your agency after your individual demo. So many options there.
Great. The next question I have also got a couple around this same area. We only report the activity locations required by the NEA, but they collect activity locations for all their grantees. If we get them to show, can you get them to show up on the maps if they report all of that activity, all those activity locations to you?
Yeah, definitely. So the NEA reporting requirements only require activity location reporting for a certain set of activity types, and those are the requirements and the minimum really that should be reported. However, if you're set up to report activity locations for all grantees, I think that is extremely useful, and it tells a fuller picture, and we're happy to receive and integrate those data into your state's dashboard.
Great. I have another question about regranting data this time. The regranting data is not reported in their FDR. Does that make a difference on how those maps will look for their state?
Yeah, that's a big issue, and it's come up a little bit already. So it's a data issue, really, that can make a big difference in how state maps end up looking. And a number of states, 17 states, have regranting programs, and detailed data reporting for regranting data are not explicitly required in the FDR. But we know that many states are collecting some level of data for regrants, and we're happy to integrate those data into the maps and dashboards if you send them to us. And in fact, Michigan is one state that has such a program, and we are working with them to receive their additional regranting data, and as a result, their maps will actually end up looking fuller than what you saw today.
Great. I also had a number of questions come across regarding how fresh the data is. So kind of what time period do the dashboards represent? Is this FY16 data, or when will FY17 data be available? Stuff around the kind of time frame and stuff. If you could kind of go a little bit more into detail on kind of where the data is coming from.
Sure. So we're using the most recently available data from either your FDR or from the American Community Survey, and now we have a pretty full complement of fiscal year 2016 data. And so the fiscal year 2016 data is actually necessary for us to be able to report activity locations and the new beneficiary data. So it's a big part of what we're showing. So for every state, we have, or most every state, we have fiscal year 2016 data. And the most current American Community Survey right now is fiscal year 2015. As those things are updated, we can also make updates. But our plan right now is to try and get these dashboards into as many state hands as possible with this current year data, or fiscal year 2016. And then at some point, we'll be updating and getting everyone 2017 data once we have a fuller complement of 2017 data.
Awesome. I also have a couple questions about the data itself. So I'm going to combine a couple here. Is this data able to be viewed by specific grant program? For instance, can it shed any light on who is or isn't receiving arts education or creative placemaking, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the data is your final descriptive report details. So basically anything that is within the FDR can be used for analysis, including arts education, obviously, is a big component of that. What we've done here, in order to get something that we can replicate for every state, we've focused on these specific demographic characteristics and the beneficiary data. It's totally possible to do some additional custom analyses looking at different aspects of the FDR. Also, it's totally possible to do custom analyses based on program data or other things that you may not be reporting in your FDR. So I guess I would say that there's lots of stuff that's possible using similar tools, but that would require a conversation with our team and see how we could do some custom work for a particular state. Great.
I also had a couple questions about the data regarding what kind of cleaning was made before publishing. were there any concerns about skewed data based on population, race, and poverty reporting, and kind of how you guys would identify that, if so?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, this is all part of our perennial work to clean FDR data, of which Kelly Liu plays a large role in. So the cleaning process happens with every state as you send in your FDR, and NASA does its own cleaning process based on a tool that we have. So we're certainly checking every FDR for validity as much as we possibly can with some tools and our eyes. But I would say that this type of work also helps bring to the forefront some potential data challenges that we all might have in collection, right? So I think one thing that's valuable about having these conversations is that, you know, the data is going to say what it does in the FDR, and I think as we look at it as a team with you and with state arts agencies, there's things that we'll learn that will hopefully improve reporting over time, right? So there's all types of potential issues with FDR data that we come across in our daily work, and I think this is a tool to, you know, help improve it on both ends.
Great. I also have a couple questions kind of related about other things that could be added to the maps. So apart from like grants, one of the agencies does a lot of the agencies do a lot of trainings and convenings. Is there any way to add those to the maps as well?
Right. So that's a really good question. So what we're really looking at here is grants data as reported in your FDR. But of course, there are other things that state arts agencies do besides grant making. Those things aren't always reported in FDRs in a way that perhaps they should be, but regardless, there is a way to put those locations on a map. Basically, all we need is some sort of systematic way for you to be collecting those data and to be sending us the address information, right? So we can geocode, which means we can get the coordinates for any address location that you have. And so if, you know, I think there's the possibility of working with our team to come up with a way for us to receive the data and then put those things on the map. It might be another question about how those fit into a particular dashboard that we're showing you today, or if it might make more sense to display those data in a different sort of custom map that we might be able to create.
Okay, that brings up another question I received. So it looks like all the data is broken down geographically by county. Are there other geographic breakdowns that can be used, like zip code or MSA?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, you know, there's a lot of possibilities out there, and you know, we have tools to be able to display different levels of geography, but it all sort of depends on what data is available. How we've approached this, at least in this iteration of the work, is to look at things on the county level. Of course, that means counties are certainly different in different states. You know, you tend to have much larger counties in the West. You tend to have some smaller counties in the South and along the East Coast. So there's not a perfect geography, but what we've found in the feedback that we received so far, that county is a practical level for state arts agencies to review their data. And that may not be, that's probably not the case in every single state. So that's just to say that counties we think are a good geographic level to do this on a nationwide basis, but again, happy to have conversations about different geographies that we can put on a map, and there's a lot of possibilities there.
Great. I also had a couple more questions about what kind of individuals are represented here. So are incarcerated individuals represented, or specific institutions at risk? Is it different for youth versus adults? Can you answer that question?
Right, so I mean, it's the reporting requirements just outline those distinct groups as those groups. There's not really a large amount of language defining, which institutions or which age groups fit one of those groups. So that's largely about how a grantee will perceive the community that they're serving. So in the demographic data, we're not able to see those particular groups in the American Community Survey, but that is part of the FDR collection. So as they're reported is how they're shown in these tools.
Okay, great. Also, did NASA examine this data on a national level or state by state only?
Right, so what we've done here is really taking a state by state approach, and part of that is because the story will be really different in each state, and it's going to be most relevant. Your state data is obviously most relevant to a state arts agency and obviously the NASA membership. So that's been the focus of our efforts, but we've also done some work on the national level within our best practices page in the research section. We do have an infographic that looks at the distribution of grants by median household income across the country, which does show that state arts agencies make a larger percentage of awards in counties that are below the national median household income. So we do have some national analysis here. I think we'll have some more as this work grows, but with these particular set of dashboards, we've really focused on state-by-state information.
Great. I had one other question about, and you may have answered this, but I wanted to bring it up again. Are these dashboards going to be embeddable like on a website or a blog or something like that, as well as being available for viewing on Tableau or via kind of like JPEG PDF?
Yeah. So that kind of goes back to the idea that there's a few ways to receive the information. If you want to put something online and there's no issues with making that publicly available, so obviously if you're putting something on a blog, you're likely not going to have an issue with that being publicly available. These can be uploaded to a tool called Tableau Public, which would allow you to embed the visualization on your website or a blog or wherever on the internet. And that's actually how we've done a lot of our own visualizations at NASA. A lot of the visualizations on our research page, for example, on the funding page and the grant-making page, these are Tableau visualizations that we've embedded on our website via Tableau Public. So if you're interested in putting something up online using these dashboards or other things that are created via Tableau, that's something that's pretty easy to do. Great.
I think that's all the questions we had today, but I wanted to thank everyone for such a lively Q&A session. And thanks Kelly, Patricia, and Ryan. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.